The median cost of a traditional funeral, with viewing and burial in the United States, is $8,300. Add a burial vault, which most cemeteries require, and it climbs to $9,995. Add a cemetery plot, a headstone, flowers, an obituary, and clergy, and you are past $12,000 before anyone has said a word about what kind of person the deceased was. That bill arrives within 72 hours of a death. There is no payment plan. There is no negotiation window that most families know about. And according to LIMRA's 2024 Insurance Barometer study, 102 million American adults, 42% of the adult population, say they need more life insurance than they currently have, with many having none at all. The financial hit is real. It is predictable, and almost nobody plans for it. Here is what it actually costs, and what the industry does not want you to know before you walk through the door. Let's run the actual numbers, not the headline figure, but the line-by-line breakdown that most families only see after they have already said yes to everything. The National Funeral Directors Association's 2023 General Price List Study, the most comprehensive annual survey of funeral pricing in the country, drawn from hundreds of funeral homes across all 50 states, gives us a clear picture of where the money goes in a traditional burial funeral. Basic services fee, $2,300. This is the non-declinable fee. It is the one charge the funeral home is permitted to apply to every arrangement, regardless of what you select. It covers the funeral director's time, overhead, and the administrative work of the death. You cannot opt out of it. Under the FTC Funeral Rule, it is the only mandatory overhead charge a funeral home is allowed to impose. Transfer of remains, $350. The cost to transport the body to the funeral home, typically within a defined local radius. Embalming, $775. This is where one of the most common and most expensive misconceptions lives. No state requires embalming, not one. If you are planning a direct burial or a cremation, embalming is not legally required anywhere in the country. Funeral homes are required by the FTC to disclose this in writing. Many do not lead with it. Use of facilities for viewing, $450. The room rental for the visitation period. Use of facilities for funeral ceremony, $500. The room for the service itself, hearse, $350. Transport from the funeral home to the cemetery, casket, $2,500. Average. This is the single most expensive line item in a traditional funeral, and it is the one with the highest markup. Industry studies have found that funeral homes can mark up caskets between 200 and 500% above wholesale cost. The average casket shopper, when shown a floor display, buys one of the first 3 models presented. The funeral home's financial incentive is to show you the higher-priced options first. Outer burial container, vault, $1,572. Required by most cemeteries to prevent the ground from caving in as the casket deteriorates. Not required by law, but functionally mandatory at most burial sites. That is the funeral home bill. It does not include the cemetery plot, which runs $1,000 to $4,000, depending on the region. It does not include the headstone, which averages $1,000 to $3,000. It does not include flowers, the obituary fee, clergy, or catering for a reception. The true all-in cost for a traditional burial funeral in most U.S. markets runs between $10,000 and $15,000. That is the traditional burial number. Here is where the comparison gets interesting, because the alternative most people are switching to is not as cheap as the headline price suggests. Burial, $8,300 to $15,000 plus all-in cremation. With viewing and service, $6,280. Median direct cremation, no service, $2,200. Average B. In 2025, the cremation rate in the United States reached 63.4%, meaning nearly two-thirds of Americans who die are now cremated. By 2045, the NFDA projects that rate will reach 82.3%. In 2005, it was 32%. This is one of the fastest behavioral shifts in American consumer history, and the math largely explains it. But here is what the headline cremation price hides. The $6,280 median for cremation with viewing includes many of the same line items as a burial funeral. The basic services fee still applies. The embalming fee may still apply if there is a viewing. The use of facilities fees apply. The hearse applies. What you are not paying for is the casket or the burial vault, which together account for roughly $4,000 in the traditional burial number. Direct cremation, where the body is cremated with no viewing, no ceremony with the body present, and the ashes returned to the family, is the genuinely low-cost option. The average direct cremation runs approximately $2,200, though prices vary significantly by region. Regional variation matters. MoneyGeek's analysis, drawing on NFDA data, found that funeral costs in the Northeast run approximately 8% above the national median, while southern states average closer to $6,700 for a burial funeral, a 34% regional gap. California averages $11,777. Mississippi, the burial versus cremation comparison is not just a preference question. For a family without savings or life insurance, it can be the difference between absorbing a manageable expense and going into debt to bury someone. Most people who watch this video will assume they know their rights in this situation. Most do not. And the gap between what you're legally entitled to and what most funeral homes actually do is where thousands of dollars disappear. In 1984, the FTC enacted the Funeral Rule, a federal regulation that gives every American specific, enforceable rights when arranging a funeral. It is one of the most consumer-protective regulations in the personal finance space. It is also one of the most consistently violated. Here is what you are legally entitled to under the Funeral Rule. You can get prices over the phone. Funeral homes must provide itemized pricing to anyone who calls and asks, without requiring your name, without requiring any commitment. This is federal law. In 2023, the FTC conducted its first undercover phone sweep of 278 randomly selected funeral homes. 39 received warning letters for failing to provide pricing information as required. You can bring your own casket. Funeral homes cannot refuse to use a casket you purchased elsewhere, and they cannot charge a handling fee for doing so. Online casket retailers sell models that are functionally identical to funeral home floor models at 20 to 60% of the funeral home price. A casket the funeral home sells for $2,500 may be available from a third-party retailer for $900 to $1,200, and the funeral home is legally required to use it. You can decline embalming. As stated earlier, no state requires it. If you do not plan a viewing with the body present, embalming is almost always optional. at an average cost of $775. Declining it where appropriate is one of the largest single savings available in funeral planning. You must receive an itemized statement before paying. Funeral homes cannot present you with a bundled package price and require you to accept it. The FTC requires an itemized list of every charge before you sign anything. But here is the gap between what the law requires and what commonly happens. As of 2026, the FTC Funeral Rule does not require funeral homes to post prices on their websites. More than 60% of funeral homes have little or no pricing information online. The requirement for price disclosure applies in person and by phone. But families in the immediate aftermath of a loss are often not in a position to make comparison calls, and the industry's pricing remains largely opaque at the moment of highest vulnerability. 102 million American adults say they need more life insurance than they have. 42% of the adult population. That number has been growing for 4 consecutive years. For the specific purpose of covering final expenses, the math is straightforward. The median all-in funeral cost in the United States, including cemetery costs, runs between $10,000 and $12,000. The most common final expense life insurance policies are structured around a $10,000 to $15,000 death benefit, precisely because that is the number the industry and most financial planners identify as the realistic cost floor. Here is what that coverage actually costs. A final expense whole life insurance policy for a 60-year-old in good health typically runs between $50 and $80 per month for a $10,000 death benefit, depending on the provider and the state. Over 10 years, that is $6,000 to $9,600 in total premiums for a $10,000 guaranteed payout. For a 50-year-old, the same coverage runs closer to $30 to $50 per month. For families with younger members who would be planning decades in advance, a 20-year term life policy for a healthy 30-year-old with a $250,000 death benefit, more than enough to cover funeral costs and provide income replacement, runs under $200 per year. 72% of Americans overestimate the cost of basic term life insurance, according to LIMRA. There are also 2 government benefits worth knowing. The Social Security Administration pays a one-time lump sum death benefit of $255 to the surviving spouse or qualifying child of a deceased worker. This number has not been updated since 1954 and covers approximately 3% of the current median funeral cost. The Veterans Administration offers a burial allowance for eligible veterans, up to $796 for a non-service-connected death and higher for service-connected deaths, as well as burial in a national cemetery at no cost for eligible veterans and their spouses. The 3 alternatives to a traditional funeral that offer the most significant cost savings are direct cremation, $2,200 average, green burial, $2,250 average, and body donation to a medical school, which is typically provided at no cost and may include the return of cremated remains to the family after research use. Here is what most planning conversations miss entirely: the cost of not planning, measured not in the funeral bill, but in what it does to the people left behind. The end-of-life cost picture in the United States averages $88,300 in total, according to MoneyGeek's 2025 analysis. $80,000 in final year medical expenses and $8,300 for the funeral itself. The funeral is the smaller number, and it is the one most families are least prepared for, because it arrives on a timeline that does not allow for deliberation. The family that has had the price conversation in advance, that knows whether burial or cremation is preferred, that has contacted 2 or 3 funeral homes for general price lists, that has verified whether a casket from an outside retailer is an option, that has confirmed the embalming decision. That family saves between $2,000 and $5,000 compared to the family making every decision under emotional duress in the 48 hours after a death. The $8,300 median number is what it costs when no one planned. The $3,500 to $6,000 range is achievable for most families. With basic preparation, awareness of the FTC Funeral Rule, and a willingness to make a few phone calls before they need to. The difference between those two numbers is not grief. It is information. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this.